Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that you're here joining us. And we're just thrilled to be able to share with you this afternoon. My name is Caitlin Yarnall, and I'm the Chief Storytelling Officer at the National Geographic Society. And I couldn't be happier to be here with my friend, Elizabeth Christofferson, who's the CEO and President of the Rita Allen Foundation. And we hope that this will be a light and interactive session. So please, share your questions, use the Q&A box, chat with each other. We'll be monitoring those, and feel free really to wave your virtual hand at any point if you have a question or we're unclear about anything. So I think we're just going to dive right in because we only have an hour and we have a lot of things to share with you and want to have an engaging discussion. So I'll just start by saying, Elizabeth, why are we here? Do we know why we're here?
Well, thank you, Caitlin. First of all, it's a pleasure to join you, and thank you for the invitation to join you here today, too. I think, first of all, a warm welcome, and so delighted to be among the community here today of really thought leaders and practitioners and people who understand that communication is vital in terms of the aspirations we share and seek in this world, too. I think one of the things that we all know, too, is that this is a time where we've had multiple crises, and our environment is changing so much from wildfires, floods, pandemics, important racial justice, and that we're hyper communicating, we're really hyper connected rather, and things are moving faster with more ambiguity, uncertainty, and so forth, thinking about how we build trusted relationships and how we use evidence. I mean, there are so many wicked, complex problems really rooted in science and technology that we're seeking, I think, more partnerships, more collaboration, more sense of we, if you will, to both support innovators and developing relationships with intentionality, and really a full array of multidisciplinary tools to help us discover how we can be better stewards of our planet, from trees to human health. And stories can be what hold some of not only our aspirations, some of the changes we seek certainly are key to all of that as part of our infrastructure. But Caitlin, I want to ask you, the National Geographic Society has had enormously powerful experience with storytelling and a global audience in the many millions. What is the story of what brings National Geographic to these questions today?
Sure. I thought we would take a little history tour here first. Like all institutions, National Geographic's been evolving. So we're 132, almost 133 years old. National Geographic Society has always been a nonprofit. And we started as really a club of adventurous explorers who wanted to go out and document and really discover the world and share with their friends. It was kind of an accidental storytelling organization. They discovered at some point that if they were going to remain financially solvent, they needed to sell some of their discoveries to fund future expeditions. And that was how National Geographic magazine was born. And it's really, set the course forward for National Geographic as a media company and as an institution based in storytelling. But of course, a lot has changed. So, technically, this is some of the first macro photography of the gentleman here is doing in the early 1900s, trying to capture insects. So the technology looks totally different. But, the way we approach storytelling is also different now. We are thinking a lot about who should be telling stories and why should we be telling stories. Just because we saw it and we think it's important isn't necessarily enough. That's oftentimes a good driver, but we want to think about, how do we make science and our world accessible to everyone? And I personally think that storytelling is the best way to do that. I think it's what makes us human. What makes us unique as a species. It's how we recall history. It's how we find patterns and narratives, and it's what makes us laugh, right? I think every good joke is a story. And so now, the technology is different. In this case, we're putting a camera on a shark, which I don't think that gentleman on the previous slide could have ever imagined. But the premise really is the same. We're seeing the world and want to share that and share the discoveries with the audience. And as Elizabeth said, we reach almost 1 billion households a day, but really I don't think the numbers matter as much as the audiences that we're able to shift minds, shift hearts, and potentially change action as we go forward. So, you know, I like to think about that's what we're doing right now, but also imagine what could we be doing going forward. I'm so excited to be here with Elizabeth because we've been doing this imagining together. And we don't have all the answers, and we, to some extent, are in early days of figuring out what this could look like, what it should look like. But who you see here is someone that we both love, a friend of both of ours, on environment, who's a storyteller, a photographer, and a fellow that we have co-funded and really lean on to help us communicate science. So Elizabeth, I would just ask you, you know, what brought Rita Allen to the point of supporting civic science fellows, and why storytelling? Civic science could go in a lot of ways, but why storytelling?
Absolutely. Well, not only, Caitlin, thank you. It is exciting because we're wired as human beings, aren't we? Since the earliest cave days when people actually drew their stories on the walls to this. But I think to give a very brief story of Rita Allen, because we're using the then, now, imagine, if you will. We're a bit younger. We for over 40 years, we've been funding biomedical scientists, outstanding young scientists at an early stage in their careers. They're setting up their labs to figure out some of the fundamental building blocks as they investigate, you know, better options for cancer, neurological diseases. Even somebody helped develop CRISPR for better pain options. And that has been something that we've been very, very proud of. And yet about 10 years ago, a little over a decade ago, I have a background in communications, public media, we started thinking more about the environment for our scientists. So much was clearly changing in the last decade. And we saw, with help of studies from the National Academy and others, that we need far more interdisciplinary approaches to complex problems that are rooted in science and tech. We need, as Richard Bessard was talking about, evidence-based approaches. And so there's a growing science of science communication and research that I've learned a lot about what doesn't work to help people understand and follow scientific guidance when it conflicts with pre-existing beliefs. You know, for example, the information deficit model thinks perhaps we all need more facts, or the legacy broadcast model, one approach fits all, or scientists and other experts in silos. Or the diversity deficit, leaving too many people out of helping prioritize, problem solve, and benefit. And the wide gap for use of research and practice, neglecting dialogue and norms, no central source of best practices for agents of change. Anyway, a wonderful introduction to this area of research is the Public Face of Science initiative from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And they just came out with a final report focusing on priorities for the future that you may all want to take a look at. We've also been working with researchers to ask professional communicators at science philanthropies how they approach their work strategically and what they feel needs to change. And so we hear from many that we need to build new coalitions to develop new norms, from science societies to media, social science, journalism, scientific researchers, and philanthropy, and the need to embed in every part of our work a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to empower leaders who reflect the diversity of our nation. So important that you talked about the we. We need to work with communities, not for communities, imagining that we have the answers, but to work with others to think about this. So as we were thinking about what we might imagine, and now you were just seeing a picture of current researchers, but as we're thinking what we imagine, we came back and decided that one thing we would do in partnership in Yay National Geo to create a cohort of pipeline of diverse leaders, civic science fellows who would inspire each other and ask us ask exceptional networked organizations to host. And yes, thank you, National Geo, again, and to engage in learning side by side. And from National Storytelling Summit that you invited all our fellows and other partners, and workshops like the one that Anand is giving in October, and from communities that are often not heard or engaged. So just to give you a little bit more about who else is in this network, Adnan Wazi was part of the inspiration for the Civic Science Fellows. We supported him to work with WGBH and NOVA to cultivate new audiences and new platforms. and he calls the information deficit model factsplaining. And now a second fellow is joining him at WGBH, Ray Maktufi, who is looking specifically at ways to spread effective methods of combating misinformation, and whose work, like so many fellows, has taken on some new urgency in the face of our current environment. And so among the innovative methods their teams are exploring is a space-themed escape room live streamed on Twitch and featuring teams of young YouTube stars. Or we have a slide from Public Lab, because what we learn from connecting the science of science communication, the art of working with people and communities, we find that storytelling has a very special place, that social science confirms that stories have the power to connect us to others and change our beliefs. And storytelling is how our brains work. Unless an idea is organized as part of a greater story, we can't really remember it. And as social creatures, we're also evolved to tell stories, and that's key for developing important social survival skills. And the stories also are able to get around people's defense mechanisms and make them more open to information they disagree with. And so the key concept for understanding the narrative impact is transportation, which is when people become absorbed by a narrative and end up changing the process, similar to traveling to different countries that can change your perspectives and beliefs. And I believe that's something that National Geo does so well. And you have so many examples of how through this transporting, we tend to learn more and care more and become stewards more too. So really, I'd love to kind of focus back on our shared fellow who we're just so extremely excited as part of the group of 15. And might you tell us, Caitlin, a little bit more about his work, which I know focuses on attention and how visual storytelling can transport us and shift the way we experience and care for the world around us. What's it like to use photography to tell a story? And why are scientists and others using this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll shift to Anand in just a second because I think he's really the embodiment of this. But I think National Geographic, in the same way we became an accidental storytelling organization, we also became an accidental photography organization and an accidental, TV organization and video organization. We, in fact, when, because the magazine really predated the wide use of photography, when the first editor of the magazine decided to publish photographs in the magazine, several board members quit in protest because it was dumbing down the science and dumbing down the geography. And of course, you can say the rest is history. Now, whenever we do brand research, people associate photography and video and film and visual storytelling with National Geographic. And I think, that of course predated social science and us really understanding why. Now we understand more. We understand that we are primates with large eyes and more nerve receptors connected to our brain, our eyes to our brain, than any other one of our senses. We are able to process visual information much, much faster than written or oral information. And also our brains remember imagery. So I think, we could do a fun experiment with the audience where I think if we asked everyone to, what's the earliest picture you remember, right? Some memories I know I have from my childhood are just flash images, and that's how our brains work. And so I think that rather than just saying, well, that's cool, that's nice, that's very interesting, we have decided, as a nonprofit that wants to, our mission is to illuminate and protect the wonder of the world, to use that to our advantage and to really empower and to fund and to build capacity in visual storytellers. And Anand is a perfect example of that. He went to UC Berkeley and studied biology, which made his immigrant parents very happy. I think made them less happy when he decided to ditch the lab and pick up a camera. But he really hasn't ditched the lab. He's made a career out of explaining complex laboratory science, particularly biological sciences, visually. And he does that by really understanding the science, spending time with them, and then building innovative new imaging systems so that we are able to see things like we've never seen before. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of his images here. He proposed a story on hummingbirds to the magazine several years ago, and the editors actually said, Anand, you know, you're great, you're wonderful, but everyone has taken pictures of hummingbirds. How are you going to do hummingbirds in a different way? You know, they're some of the most beloved creatures. You know, my iPhone has probably 200 pictures of hummingbirds, right? We all are lucky enough if you have a feeder in time to get close to them. He actually said, I don't want to just make beautiful images of hummingbirds. I want to show what amazing creatures they are and how they've evolved to be these little super flyers, and we still don't understand them. So he spent a lot of time with scientists in the lab and to understand, you know, how does the reflectivity of their feathers work? How do they move? And you can see the images are just stunning and make us look at these birds in a different way. This is an image of a hummingbird's tongue and how they actually eat. And, you know, photography has the ability to stop time, literally, particularly still photography. And you can see here, you know, how the shape of a forked tongue of a hummingbird, which I certainly didn't know that until I saw this image. This is a super, super slow, you know, screen grab of a video that Anand made of a hummingbird shaking itself like a dog. We've seen our dogs shake. Well, hummingbirds are able to do that. And this is what it looks like to go in the field with Anand. You know, a lot of it is actually low tech. You'll see some milk crates and some sort of plastic things there setting him up, and then a lot of high tech to get the shot he wants. And what I love about this, and I think it's emblematic of the partnership between Rita Allen and National Geographic and between Elizabeth and I, is that it is a collaboration of some of the low tech, high tech, all with the thought of we need to make this stuff understandable. If we just talk about the fact that it's, you know, abstract and hard, it turns people off. It turns audiences off. And as Elizabeth said, you know, there's too many challenges right now for that to happen with science. So before I go further, I have a little clip of Anand in his own words. We made this video actually for kids and for teachers.
Did you know there's a parasite called a jewel wasp that can do brain surgery on its host? It's evolved this incredible mechanism to control the mind of this cockroach.
Science photographer Anand Varma collaborates with scientists to document unique stories about the natural world. One project took him to Israel, where he learned about the parasitic jewel wasp.
I went to a lab in Israel that studies this behavior of mind control. They're hoping to learn how this venom works.
The jewel wasp first stings the cockroach's body in order to paralyze it.
As the cockroach is paralyzed, it weaves its stinger into the cockroach's brain. It feels around for the right part of its brain, and then it injects this specialized venom cocktail that actually removes the cockroach's ability to control its own behavior. The muscles of the cockroach recover, but it can no longer generate the will to move on its own. So then the wasp takes the cockroach by its antenna and leads it to its burrow.
The wasp then lays an egg on its victim's leg. When the larva hatches, it will eat the roach alive, devouring its internal organs before forming a cocoon inside its abdomen.
The symptoms that this cockroach has are actually very similar to Parkinson's disease, where your muscle fibers function, but you can no longer control them properly. And so they're hoping to understand better treatments for Parkinson's disease by understanding how this venom works. I think that's one of the coolest stories I've heard in the natural world.
So I don't know about everyone else, but I think that that's pretty fascinating and pretty cool that, you know, venom cocktail is something that exists, and I think Anand has a unique ability in not only making the unseeable seen, but also connecting it to real world applications. So in that case, you know, why do we care about this? Well, one, because it's fascinating and they're real life zombies, but also because it's got great implications for diseases such as Parkinson's and medical understanding. I'm just going to show a couple more of his images. In this case, this was a beehive that Anand set up in his backyard because he wanted to understand the development of bees. And he didn't want to be going back and forth to the lab for something that was just normal, like bees growing. So this were in his backyard in Berkeley. So Elizabeth, I guess I would just switch back to you and say, you know, I've done my little love fest ode to Anand, and I know that everyone here, if you get a chance to ever listen to him talk, you should. But how does he connect to the broader work of your civic science fellows, and why is he an important part of the cohort?
Oh, first of all, just thank you for showing all this. Every time I see this, and by the way, he's done a TED talk that has reached over 2.5 million people. I mean, he's just really a wow when he does this. But one of the things our fellows do is they come from different backgrounds. They may start out in science, but they understand that using the tools of journalism tools. They're also journalists who understand they need to work with scientists, social scientists, with people with lived experience. In other words, it's valuing different kinds of expertise to think how we might engage with people, because as I saw some wonderful comments in the chat, you know, that fan of Sylvia Earle, me too, Jane Goodall, and so forth. But we understand that if people don't know about something, it's hard to care about something. And so part of this work is how do we communicate some of the importance of taking care of our planet when it's so desperately needed. How do we think about even how the climate change and some of the science affects and influences health and research. So there's so many different parts of this. And one of the things that Anand did, he also gave all the fellows give an example of their work for other fellows, so they can learn a little bit more about what tools they're using and what approaches they're using and how they're building partnerships, I think, that people haven't built before. And so he did a wonderful thing in his garage showing how he had been taking care of jellyfish, which is another example, and everybody was mesmerized. I mean, just immediately started caring about what happened to the jellyfish during COVID. You know, did they survive? How did he keep them going through? And it just was a perfect, even small example of how jellyfish may not be on most of our minds every day, but when we have the opportunity to see something as spectacular as that, and to have and to tell the story, we start developing more curiosity about the world too. And I think part of what we're doing, we've got individuals working in other networked organizations, whether it's media or academia or working directly in communities. It's coming together and sort of developing the collective approach. That's where the civic and civic science is that we have to move from the I to the we and figure out how to make we across silos and disconnects that we have in our society in order to really address some really complex and important things. And we see just an enormous opportunity in the power of storytelling to create that change. I know that we also, Caitlin, you and I work with media impact funders and work with other funders to try to help, with very limited resources, as we know that there's lots of stresses on journalism as well as many other sectors of our society, to think how we can really call ourselves to collective action and to, if you will, create greater access, I think. I wanted to mention that John Powell, who has a quotation of belonging about not just pulling up a chair to the table, but to have agency when you're at the table. And I think that's partly what we want to do is through our storytelling is create room at the table for all of us. Because of issues that are essential to our well-being too, and to creating more equitable and resilient future. I think that's ultimately and re-examining and reimagining an even better pathways to that future, I think. So I think we also want to talk, Caitlin, and have our audience, if you will, or people who are here joining us today, join us in some questions. But I'm wondering even how they might be using storytelling in their work, how they, what some of the opportunities might be, what some of the barriers might be, how as we bring you to the table, might you pose some of the questions so we could have more of a conversation. It's fun to show things that we care deeply about, but we learn, grow, become as we listen to others too, don't we, Caitlin?
Absolutely. And I feel like I'm lucky enough to be immersed in the world of storytelling all the time. But I really would love to hear from this group here. How are we collectively experimenting with storytelling or leaning into it, or where are there challenges in this space? So we have.
I do see Emily Chow has just mentioned, what are the challenges that you face when working with scientists to tell these important stories? And thank you, Emily. That's a great question. We all know that that we have still different important shifts, if you will, on how we might connect. But one of the things that many people didn't even know, Caitlin, is how many scientists you actually have as storytellers. And maybe you want to start there first, and then we can add a few more things.
Yeah, we actually at National Geographic were lucky to have a cohort of people. Anna's one of them, who started as scientists. Few of them went all the way to the PhD level, but started as scientists and then decided that their heart was in storytelling. And so Anna's a great example. Ronan Donovan, you might have seen, he has a show this summer or last fall on National Geographic channel about the secret lives of wolves. We have Nirupa Rao, who's a botanical illustrator who started as a botanist. I think that is a natural transition for some, but they're few and far between, those who really can master both. So I think that there's several ways to approach this. One, we do a lot of training for scientists. So we have science grantees who we put them through something called a science telling boot camp, where we really try to get them to understand, like, how would you make an abstract into a pitch that a journalist would listen to? How do you speak to a journalist? How do you speak to camera on your phone? If you find a new species, take a picture of it. Preferably take a picture of it, without your shadow on it or out of a bag dead. These are some of the just basic 101s that seem simple to us, that just scientists aren't trained to think this way. And then I think the other, great success traditionally of National Geographic has been pairing storytellers with scientists, but they have to be storytellers who have time and patience and the intellectual curiosity to get into the world with scientists, whether that's in the field or in the lab. And I think, that's becoming one of the bigger challenges in the media landscape as budgets get crunched and the news cycle gets faster, is how do we create space in the industry for that long science happens slowly, and for journalists to be able to keep pace with that and understand and slow down. And so that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Elizabeth.
Well, sure. I think it's so exciting hearing what you are doing, and it inspires people too. But I also know Pew, as Rita Allen does, we've got a lot of scientists in our that we've funded over the years, and we're also seeing, partly because of the incentives for scientists, they haven't perhaps had background in storytelling or a boot camp such as you're talking about, but the younger scientists who are growing up as digital natives, I mean, they're interested in podcasting, they're interested in connecting with Mary Woolley at Research America. They want to build new relationships, and they understand that they need to have better ways that people can understand. So it doesn't feel like that you have a language apart from other people, but how do we create something universal? If you look at the photograph behind me, and I have it, I'm not in California, but it's a picture of nature with clean skies, if you will, before the wildfires to this. If you look at that, I mean, you might imagine that you're there also. You might imagine that you're looking at the things that Anand shows, or the places that we travel, even if we're home on our couch, watching something National Geo. But we know that that there's a hunger for trying to connect and for trying to have people understand, to not only want to become stewards of science, which is essential for so many solutions, but also a more equitable science for all in terms of helping decide the priorities, and the ways that we're doing things. So there's a lot of new efforts, and people are working together and with a number of partners on how to even tell a story. We had one scientist who was talking about throwing a ball with his father every night, and he started with something that we could all relate relate, or we could all imagine or hear the picture in our mind, even if we didn't have a photograph at that point, to then go on to what that meant when he's talking about fundamental research. So I imagine these are some of the techniques that you're hearing over and over again, is understand what your audience might care about, and then build a bridge.
Absolutely. I actually studied cartography as an undergrad, and I remember my first cartography class, a professor saying, you shouldn't make a map unless you can articulate its purpose and who the audience is. And I use that to this day multiple times a day. Like, if you can't tell me what the audience is and what you're trying to, how you're trying to move them, you have no business starting. I think I see a question from Jill who says, when you train scientists in communications, what seems to resonate with them the most? And I think Elizabeth already touched on this, but one of my experiences has been, we make them try to simplify, which is really hard, because scientists have been trained to see complexity and to think about the complexity and to be specialists and to find their niche within their field. We do an exercise, I should say, that sounds super simple. You can do it with kids, but scientists, and the more learned you are, I think the harder it is we force them to make a video that you have to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they have to explain how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And we make them break it down. And they say to camera, find the bag of bread, open the bag of bread, find 2 pieces of bread, find the jar of peanut butter, open the jar of peanut butter, get a knife. You get where I'm going. And that exercise, I think, seems to resonate the most with them, because they'll often jump to chapter 23 in their research and their process. And by that point, they've lost an audience or they've lost a journalist. I don't know what you have found has resonated most with them, Elizabeth.
Well, as I said, I think different clarifying why you want, who's the audience first, what do they care about, what's your interest, and then finding the connections there. We also talked, I know you mentioned this earlier because both of us agree with this, but thinking about the messenger as well as the message and the audience is extremely important. And so part of our efforts is as we care deeply about an expanded sense of we, a more inclusive we, is also thinking about a more inclusive sense of how we communicate with our communities. We just did recently had a conversation with a number of top journalists talking about being part of the community and or at least developing relationships. So it's not for someone, but it's with someone. And I think having some of these shifts are extremely important too. This is something that, by the way, that post this conversation, we'd be glad to, both Caitlin and I would both be glad to share whatever experience we have, as well as learn from you. So I also want to put out there that this is not a simple or easy answer talking about this, but I see that we've got another one, and that is, how about getting advice for organizational leadership to buy in storytelling efforts? That's from Lauren. But Caitlin, I imagine that's not difficult where you sit, but perhaps you have other things to add to that.
I'd say, you'd be surprised. I think that it's not, and I'm in such a fortunate position, right? It's in my title, it's in our mission statement. But even still, there's this. It surprises me, even in such a sophisticated storytelling organization that I sit in, and storytelling literally built the house. Mm-hmm. There is still this tendency to separate. There's our education efforts, there's our science efforts, and then we have our storytelling efforts. Mm-hmm. And while that's true, we do need to have storytelling throughout. And I think some advice, and I don't have it all, I would say is, if you can at all try it, I think leaders love it. Everyone I found has said, wow, that really worked. It makes you relevant. It makes you, dare I say, like sexy in the space if you can do good storytelling. So I would say, if you can try it all, even in small ways, to show wins with storytelling, I think that's a good way to just crack open the door and do more and more. Elizabeth, you've been able
I also think sometimes we talk about something and why something as opposed to showing people. So part of it, Caitlin could have showed you or described what Anand was doing instead of showing you some of his work. And I think it's really, you know, the proximity, the immediacy, as much as we can, you know, come closer to something. I think that's often extremely important. So understanding what certain leadership cares about, and as we all know, communication professionals, that we need a seat at the table in terms of strategy for change. And so what tools can we offer? What approaches can we offer? And then how can we also show them what some of the research says, that, and as well as examples of where it makes a difference. Just again, hearing journalists in our network talk about even when we show infographics, how much better people respond to understanding the story than maybe hearing the process described. So that of course is very general advice, but again, hope points the direction to something that we care about or are trying to do. When Sylvia Earle gets up and talks about the ocean, she shows pictures, doesn't she? She takes you on the exploration there. And I know that's over and over and part of the thrill and delight that we have in being part of the National Geo community.
Yeah, and I think it's, like I said before, we're visual creatures, and we're tired of being talked to a lot of times. And so I think any chance that you can make the case to show, not tell, it will take you farther. I see something here from Sean, who says, one of my frustrations working with scientists is their aversion to headlines. They often get hung up on the nuances of scientific or research findings, which can reduce the, quote, newsworthiness of the story. Any tips on navigating this?
Well, I'd also say that I think that's part of one of our fellows, actually from the UK, Fulbright, University of Texas house there, is also looking at the role of intermediaries. In other words, sometimes the scientist isn't the person who should step out of the lab or step out of their research project, but sometimes they need folks on this call. Sometimes they need journalists to help them. They need others, civic leaders, to help them, you know, understand the topic complexity. So I think creating new partnerships is also an important one, as well as helping those scientists who want to become better, you know, people and telling their stories. And you're right. I think that's part of the scientific process. Joe Palca on Big Ideas spends time helping people understand what the process of science is, that there's always a bit of uncertainty, because that's the whole concept, is you may discover something else as you continue to do your research. So it does present a number of challenges. I don't know, Caitlin, how would you like to add to that?
I you know, reference back to what you said, Elizabeth, about building the we. And I found that often, you know, if you can approach a scientist and really get them to understand that I understand that your process is complex. And I understand why at times you can even be insulted that you think that I could boil this down to a headline. That being said, let me explain to you how journalism works. Let me explain to you how communications work. And I think if you can show how we'll hook people, and then they'll learn about your science, or they're never going to know about it, right? I found that often just this building the we of like, this is your language, this is my language, we need to meet in the middle, can often work. I think I've watched journalists sometimes just come in, and I get it, come in hot on a deadline, and they're just like, give me the sentences, I don't want to listen, we got to go. And I think that, you know, building that understanding is key.
Yeah, I also want to come back to a question from Allison, or comment by Allison. She says, I expect social science too must require space, time, and curiosity. Thoughts for us how to be effectively and ethically curious about the human species. I actually think there's some really important work that's going on now, for example, with documentary filmmakers, say around human nature, bringing a social scientist together, of having the voice of a bioethicist involved along with the scientists speaking out too. So I think it's up to us to help bring people who have different perspectives, who can help us learn more about being ethically curious, who can learn more about being more effective in our things. But a great way to start, of course, is at first in this world that we're living in of so many opportunities to capture our attention, is how we build relationships and exciting and exciting invitations for people through, I think our topic today is storytelling, and that's at the narrative is as I said, historically for human beings have been wired to be open to stories and narrative and to telling them and sharing them. Caitlin, again, we're doing a duet together, aren't we?
We are. I like it. I, you know, I agree with everything you said, Elizabeth. And for me, I don't think that we can separate the social sciences from the physical sciences in this space, right? And although, you know, humans are a much more complex, I think, subject than anything else we've found in the universe, I do think it's having the right people in the room. And Allison, you said it perfectly with, it requires space and time. And I think in particular, the more complex the subject we're dealing with, the more space and time we need. And I don't think there's anything more complex than humans and our behavior.
Yes, and I think that we know that innovation starts at the edges of people with different perspectives and backgrounds and so forth. So thinking intentionally about how we build those connections are really important too. I love the one about sound bites because, oh my goodness, we know that even a sound bite has shortened in its length. You know, I think for journalists to this. What do you think about, Caitlin, when you think about helping scientists or anybody, I guess, think in sound bites? Yes.
Well, I know I've had the terrifying experience several times of going through media training right before I've done a big live spot. And I hate it, but I then force it upon other people where if you record yourself, you get not even a very skilled editor to start shortening you into bites and you sound terrible or you say, I've never said that. I think it's an enlightening experiment. I would say, you know, I've done that with scientists where I'll say, you know, give me 2 sentences and explain what you're doing and record them and then chop it up. And they're like, but. And so I think a lot of this is just practice and repetition. I think also I found that it's okay to give permission to people to say, gee, I can't really explain that in 4 or 5 words, but let me just start. Or to say, you know, let me just describe the overall feeling or try to, sometimes it's okay to say, I can't answer that in this amount of time, but let me give you a chunk of it. But to be really like specific about that. I don't know, Elizabeth, you've had a lot more experience in this space than I have.
I still think it's incredibly hard for anybody, myself included, and all of us, when we're dealing with things that are changing, evolving, uncertain. We're used to asking the questions and searching for answers that may change. So there's a lot of tension even between thinking that we're going to say something in a short amount of time that will satisfy an answer. So one of the things you point to is media training, is the opportunity if you can actually think and talk about it. And I often, we do this sometimes with our work too, is if we can think again of telling the story to someone who perhaps isn't familiar with the field, and start practicing and imagining our conversation. If we're talking anyway, you can pick anybody you'd like, but I think that helps break it down. And I think that was part of the question too that Jill had about the PB&J example and going research. We'd be happy if you want to email or something is to connect you. We put a number of things, and thank you Batu, into the chat about a lot of resources on science of science communication. We're reminded that this isn't a new field. It's just, I think, new for many people to be thinking about connecting research and practice. It's something that we heard over and over again from the National Academy of Sciences, is the need to kind of connect more social science research with people who are actually working practitioners and scientists and others. So that's really important. What are you going to add, Caitlin?
I would say, yeah, we can definitely find some research for this, Jill, but I also think, you know, the average attention span and reading level of most media that people consume is way lower than the world scientists work in. And I think once scientists understand that, I think it's easier. And I think oftentimes we just come in, you know, journalists will come in a little bold and say, no one's going to understand this. no one's going to understand this. But I think if we can force them to simplify and say, people will understand, you've just got to work on it, that's there. But yes, we can send over the research that we have. So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was just going to wonder if Tristan could actually open it up so some of the people who are participants actually could see. I would love to actually hear, instead of us offering both of our advice. I think the other thing that we've heard through surveys and so forth is we need to shift more where we all listen more. You know, scientists can listen more, we can listen more, and again, that starts with understanding our audience through listening. And I'm just wondering, those who are on the call, if perhaps they might join and offer some of their examples that resonate with things that you heard from Caitlin or seeing Anand or what we were talking about today. Absolutely.
Please do let Tristan know if you're brave enough to go on screen with us. You're in my spare bedroom, so I won't judge. While we're waiting for brave souls, I do love this question from Sabrina, who says, you know, a lot of this has been based on, the conversation's been based on physical sciences. What about social scientists? In my organization, we have a hard time storytelling on our research because we work on human subjects. Human migration, labor abuses. We want to keep our storytelling ethical, i.e. no poverty porn, and effective at the same time. What are some suggestions for fresh approaches? And Sabrina, this is hard because we know kind of the cheap way to do this is through the poverty porn, or, you know, for only $3 a day, you can save this child. We also, thank goodness, as an industry, have, as a society, are starting to recognize a lot of the problems with that, and that what happens when we take agency away from subjects of those communications. I know I do a lot of teaching photography courses, and one of the first things that I go over with students is where is the camera relative to your eyes? You know, and we pull up a lot of classic NGO, say, you know, saving poor people images, and we're always looking down, versus, you know, political headshots, you always look up. So where is the power? And I think one of the things that we do at National Geographic that I'm really proud of is we do something called Photo Camp, where we work in communities similar to the ones you're discussing, and we give young people their cameras and we work with them, and we want to see their images and their stories through their eyes. And I found that those images and their words, when we do just a little bit of packaging and polishing, are far, far, far more powerful than anything that we traditionally would comes out of a comms shop. So I know it's kind of a deviation from normal communications about research, but I think if you're researching people, those people can have a voice in telling the story. I don't know what you'd add, Elizabeth, to that.
No, I think we're talking similar themes here, which is again, it's here's the tension again, giving a soundbite to a complicated answer, which isn't exactly what we want to do, but it probably deserves more conversation and understanding the context and doing something. But again, I think you did this. I see we have a new face on the screen, which I'm really delighted, and thank you very much for joining us. Maybe you'd share your name and your comment too. We'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for leading this wonderful discussion. My name is Anastasia Ordonez, and I'm the Director of Communications for the College of Natural Sciences at the University of Massachusetts. And one of the challenges, I've worked with nonprofit organizations in communications for a number of years, working specifically with scientists now, as I had mentioned in my earlier question, can be challenging simply because they're so used to talking about complex ideas in these very long-winded ways, right? So, you know, trying to get them to parse their words into sound bites and, you know, ways that are easily communicated can definitely be a challenge. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you both about is social media, because I find that, you know, oftentimes for all of us who've worked with earned media and with press, we tend to think about, you know, training people for communication using traditional media channels, but really a lot of the communications taking place now is through social media. So, you know, what are some examples or even guidance that you have to help scientists, you know, communicate better on the different platforms, whether it's using, you know, multimedia or what have you, because I think it's just a fantastic opportunity, especially to connect with young people.
What have you done, Anastasia? I'd love to hear that. I think that would be great because, as I said, I sometimes find out that we have people who already are on it because they're well versed, and then others who are less fluent. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, we've been experimenting a lot at CNS, the College of Natural Sciences, and working with some of our colleagues in other higher education institutions. There are some of our faculty and researchers who are really good at cultivating and developing that social media following and persona, and and naturally turn to Twitter and to Instagram to tell their visual stories. One thing that we've been working with is a couple of faculty members who've been doing great research and documenting their research using video, and working with them to cut their longer video stories into smaller segments that they can then share on Instagram stories, or in other ways. And it's really enlightening and fun, I think, because you do end up having to figure out, well, what's the nugget of the story that is most important for that audience to get from the work that's going on there. We have one faculty member, Duncan Urshik, who runs a digital life program, and he's been doing 3D modeling of different endangered animals around the world. And one of the things that they just released this week is a 3D model of a hammerhead shark down in the Bahamas named Nemesis, which was this really cool, awesome story that has made its way around, video and, and other communications channels for a number of years. But turning that amazing animal into this 3D model now allows you to engage with it in a completely different way. And you literally can go into the Digital Life website and, turn it multiple ways using your mouse, right? And so, that becomes sort of another tool to help communicate the science of conservation, especially ocean conservation and some of these more threatened animals. But I'm constantly looking for ideas of ways that we can, better engage social media communities and, and followers, so that, and in our case, because we have so many students that we're constantly communicating to, we want to make sure that they get the science and they get the facts and they get the knowledge, but that they see it in a way that's compelling and interesting.
So may I ask you, and before, oh, you go ahead, Caitlin, and then I was going to ask a question. Go ahead.
No, one little thing I was just going to say, Anastasia, that I found is helpful with scientists is, especially, I don't want to generalize, but those who are older and haven't had as much experience, is that, I think people hear social media and it sounds like, oh my gosh, what is it? What's the answer to it? When I actually just spent a little bit of time breaking down, like, this is Twitter, and this is what works on Twitter.
Yeah.
This is Instagram. This is what works on Instagram. This is, YouTube. This is what works on YouTube. And then not even breaking down, like, what are stories and reel and all this within it. And I found that when you do that, scientists and people in general find the proclivity. They're like, actually, you know what? Twitter's not so scary. Those are my people. I like that. I could tweet about my stuff. I could give updates, or, I'm taking pictures like this every day of my lab stuff anyway. I might as well post them on Instagram. So I think breaking it down for people really, I found helpful. And I always tell people too, like, as organizations, we have to think, okay, we have this piece of content. What's our Twitter strategy? What's our Reddit strategy? What's our, all these things. As an individual, you don't have to. You don't have to be on all of them. Find the one that you like and good at that. And I think that is also, and scientists understand that, and that they're like, oh, I can get really good at one thing. I found that's more helpful than just the scattershot, like, learn social media.
And I'm going to also say that I think, again, this, just like with any kind of communication that we do, we need to understand the why, and is it something that our scientists care about? So we actually, a decade ago, when I first joined Rita Allen, I asked our scientists, and of course, many of the older ones were not thinking then about social media as a way that they wanted to receive information. but the younger ones do and did. And so thinking about how you might even set up a lab, or connecting people who are very fluent with different kinds of medium, with scientists who are less so, and even doing some experiments. Do they want to, why do they want to use it? Is it for thought leadership? You know, what are the reasons there? And then giving them some opportunity to do some experiments, if you will, also I think helps. Just like with anything that's new, we need a chance to have a lab experience to try and maybe not do it perfectly the first time out, but have some support. And I don't know what kind of working groups there might be, or you know, that you found too, of colleagues other than this wonderful community and conference today, for people to find each other to kind of also share tips.
I also think I would encourage some faculty members, if they're open to it, like, can their students do it for them? Like, how fun would that be? Mm-hmm. You know, if you let, you know, someone in their class take over, you know, Professor whoever's feed, could be a fun experiment.
Yeah, we're seeing that Alice, for example, says that she did a day in a life of scientist Twitter takeover with one of her postdoctoral fellows. That sounds like a lot of fun, and looking at those thoughts too. But I think it's just really cool to hear how people are using it and thinking about it differently. I know even when we're working with our fellows, one of them was co-moderating a webinar and trying to tweet out at the same time. And she said, "My lesson is don't do both at the same time." But I think, but good for her for you know, going for it, right? You know, so how tremendous, I think, because we're going to find people in different spaces in different ways for different reasons. And I think that's really, we have to have, as we have a changing world, we have to have ways to learn and experiment a little bit differently. But again, it's about creating the partnerships and collaborations that I'm so thrilled to have with National Geo on behalf of you know, Rita Allen and our other partners doing this, and so delighted that you came on to share some of your story too, Anastasia.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate you and this conversation today.
Thank you.
Last word, Caitlin?
Well, I guess we should let people know how to get in touch with us, Elizabeth. And what resources we have. I'm going to drop my email into the chat here, and as well as some resources. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to field questions or anything in that space.
You're awesome. And I think my wonderful colleague Batu, who's also a PhD scientist, communicator, has dropped in lots of stuff for Rita Allen about ways to find us and do things. But the invitation is there. We want to learn with you and hear about your successes, as well as if there are ways that we can share things that we're learning. And again, do check out Anand's TED Talk, some of his videos. He's going to do a public workshop too later in spring of 2021 that I think should be awesome. So you'll want to keep following him, as well as the other fellows, right, Caitlin? It's exciting. You're so excited by your new group of fellows, I know. Yeah,
we have a lot of great fellows, and I just want to thank everybody for spending an hour with us and for this engaging conversation. I don't think it's that often that we get to think in this way.
Exactly. Thank you, Caitlin, for the invitation, and your colleague Rob and others, and just thank all of you. We look forward to continuing the conversation one way or the other.
Thank you.